we commend it to the House.
David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This bill, I think, will get a lot of support throughout the House, and it's not really so much about encouraging investment, as the last speaker said, but more around certainty for those that are going into these markets. And so the covered bonds market is something that's there. Banks use it. We need to provide that certainty. The Reserve Bank's going to do that through this legislation around the rules and regulations. So it's good legislation. It's in the best interests of our financial sector, and we look forward to it passing through this House.
Dr. David Clark.
Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow that contribution from Mr Bennett, which was more fulsome and thoughtful than his usual contributions are in this House. Mr Speaker, this particular piece of legislation protects big business. What this piece of legislation does is protect big business. Now, Labor will be supporting this bill for the very reason that it does also achieve something else. It preserves New Zealand's trading environment, it makes it more stable, it makes our country a little more secure in the tides of international change. So for that reason we will be supporting it, but we do it with reservation because it also does advantage big business over small business. It advances the interests of large international players over local small business interests. Mr Bennett says that's rubbish, and with respect, I suggest he hasn't understood the issue if that's his view, because there are a range of reasons why it advantages big business, and the first is because they are the first in the queue to redeem their money when someone goes flop. And that is plain and simple, clear. That's what the whole legislation is designed to achieve. It's designed to attract those big businesses so that we do have investment in New Zealand, but in return for that, it advantages their interests when a business goes flop and says, you get the first call on the money. And that means small businesses miss out. Inevitably, that's what it means, because the big business has gone flop, and then there's a queue of people after that who might receive some payment, if they're lucky, if there's enough to go round. So, with respect, I need to point out to Mr Bennett, who sat on that committee, that he clearly hasn't understood the legislation if that is what he thinks. Mr Speaker, I also want to speak more widely about how this particular legislation fits with a pattern, because it does fit with a pattern of a National Party that hates small business, it seems. It's constantly disadvantaging small business, and I want to bring several examples to bear on this, because the National Party, this term in government, has forwarded a series of legislative pieces that I've observed that really do disadvantage small business. The one we've just talked about, the way in which big businesses are advantaged through these covered bonds, and they've stretched it out to 10%. I contend, Mr Speaker, and I think several of my colleagues would agree, that this could be less. This could be 8% of the total financial interest protected in this way, and we would still get the same result. That's what they do in Australia. In Canada, it's as low as 4%. So they have stretched that envelope to say that big business is protected more than it is in Australia, and over twice as much as it is in Canada. That's the road they've gone down with this covered bonds legislation. But it's also true if we look at recent examples. For example, Mainzeal, we know, has just gone belly up. And who's missing out here? It's the individual contractors, the small business folk who are missing out, who can't get their tools back, who can't get on to earn further money, who are further down the queue. Labor is proposing solutions to make sure that small businesses, which are the lifeblood of our economy, are looked after, and that the individuals who work hard, those Kiwis who work hard to help New Zealand, to help us get ahead, that their interests are looked after. And we see National sitting on its hands. We see them saying, oh well, the big businesses are okay, they'll get out, they'll pass the contract on to another big business will be fine. They seem unconcerned by the flow-on effects from the Mainzeal collapse, and we think that's wrong. When it comes to the minimum wage, I had a bill earlier this year, Mr Speaker, that would have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and that bill would have actually advantaged small and medium businesses over larger enterprises, the chain stores that aim for the bottom price, that give the lowest wages to their staff, that have that force wages down. would have been forced to bring their wages up to the level that you get at the local fish and chip shop or the local retailer who says, I know my one or two staff and I know how much it costs to raise their families and I value them as an employee and therefore I'm going to pay above the minimum wage. So they're already paying a bit more. Now the playing field would have been levelled a little if all of those big, less scrupulous players were forced to raise their wages to match them. And the little business people would have been advantaged through that minimum wage legislation. Unfortunately, again, National sought to defeat that as soon as it could because it is interested in big business only. It's not really interested in those small contractors and the individuals and the workers and in those entrepreneurs in New Zealand who have not yet amassed the scale that is international. Another thing that we've observed from this government is red tape. This government has introduced red tape, particularly in the taxation area. It has brought in extra costs for businesses who, for example, even for contractors, if people are employing paper boys, for example, now they must report. They must keep full records about how they pay them. Same with after-school cleaners. There's a whole lot of extra red tape. We'll see it in the child support legislation as well. They'll be expecting business owners to take on some extra reporting tasks. It's the kind of thing this government does without compensating small business owners because it says they should just absorb the costs or they should move out of the way. We see it in the amalgamations in the rest home sector. We're seeing it in the DHBs at the moment. Things are being amalgamated in the interests of big business, in the interests of international players. We've seen it in Dunedin. Presbyterian Support has lost a contract, an important contract. The biggest local provider with all the local experience has lost out to an Australian-owned provider who has no experience in delivering home support services, and the government's fingerprints are all over it. They're interested in big business. They don't care about the small providers in New Zealand. We see it too, Mr. Speaker, with our high interest rate. This government refuses to give the Reserve Bank extra tools to manage in New Zealand's interests in terms of economic growth and employment. They say we're sticking with the 80s economics, we're sticking with inflation, that works for big business, there's no problem to see here, but Mr. Speaker, there is a problem. We see that manufacturing sector in the kind of advanced way, not in the primary sector. The primary sector keeps turning out milk products and that's a good thing, but in the secondary manufacturing sector, 17,000 jobs lost last year, 17,000 jobs. Those are Kiwi jobs that have been lost because of this government's neglect, because it refuses to admit that the model isn't working. It refuses to acknowledge that unemployment is the highest since it was last in government. It refuses to admit that real wages have not grown under this government. It is only interested in protecting its corporate mates. So, Mr. Speaker, we see in all of those examples, small business folk in New Zealand are at a disadvantage. They hate small business over there. They hate small business. I see them baying for small businesses' blood across the House because they don't want to see little business people get ahead. They don't want to see entrepreneurs succeed. They're only interested in protecting vested money. And that's true because they're the party of capital. They're the party of protecting vested money. That is their party interest. They're not the Labour Party. They're not interested in those who are working to make their way up through the system, that are hard-working Kiwis who put their own savings on the line to start small businesses, Mr. Speaker. Now, another example, just yesterday in this House we were debating my member's bill to Monday-Eyes, Waitangi and Anzac. And we know that the only survey done of business on that topic saw 50% of small business owners in favour of it and 37% neutral. Now, the reason that small business is either neutral or in favour of my legislation, 87% support the bill or are neutral towards it, is because small business owners know that they want to have time out with their families and friends as much as anyone else does, and they want to know that their partners and family can get their time off in a reliable way every year, not just 5 years out of 7. Small business owners want those holidays, but again, the National Party is not listening. It gets lobbied by the big business groups and says, no, we don't care about tourism. No, we don't care about what small business owners think. We're going to go our own way. Those 13% who oppose it, we'll listen to them maybe, and we might listen to big business, but we're certainly not listening to small business generally and their opinions because we don't believe in small business. That's what the National Party says. That's what the National Party says in the legislation it passes. That's what it says in the moves that it makes and the things that it's not fixing in our economy, because those things in our economy which are disadvantaging small business are advantaging big business, and that's who they're trying to protect with this covered bonds legislation. It's who they're trying to protect generally, and it shows that National Party is not interested in working hard Kiwis who want to get ahead who are saving, who want to save, who want to get ahead, who want to do the best for themselves and their family. This government is determined to protect the interests of big capital, and Mr Speaker, that is overall bad for New Zealand. That is affecting all of us in a negative way, and Mr Speaker, I'd encourage them to rethink their position on this. They could move an amendment, I'm sure, to lower the threshold for covered bonds, to do one small thing for small business. There are many more things they could do for small business. I've outlined several in this speech, and I'm hoping that this government will prick their ears up, because small business is the lifeblood of New Zealand, and the longer National Party shows that it detests small business, the worse things become in New Zealand. Our economic growth record, which is the worst in 50 years under this government, will continue to be poor until this government learns that small business is important.
Chris Ockenvold.
I commend this bill to the House.
Is this a split call?
It is a split call, Mr Speaker.
Right.